Imagine waking up one day to find your family's land, your legacy, stolen by millionaires who built 35 homes on it without a word. Then they slap you with a $500,000 fine for a dam your father built 50 years ago. That's what happened to Henry Clark, a 68-year-old retired engineer who decided to fight back in a way no one saw coming. By opening a dam's floodgates, he didn't just drown their lawns, he drowned their lies, proving that justice flows stronger than money. Henry Clark had lived on his 20-acre plot in Sunrise Valley, New England, for his entire life. The land, nestled in a lush valley, was his father's pride, a working farm with rolling fields, a small orchard, and a sturdy dam that held back a creek to irrigate the crops. His father, a World War II veteran, built the dam in 1975 to secure the family's future. Over the decades, Sunrise Valley transformed from farmland to a gated community of sprawling mansions, but Henry stayed put, tending his fields and maintaining the dam. His modest farmhouse stood like a lone sentinel against the tide of million-dollar homes. That changed one crisp October morning in 2024 when a certified letter from the Sunrise Valley Homeowners Association landed in Henry's mailbox. The gold-embossed envelope screamed trouble. Standing in his gravel driveway, Henry tore it open and read the words that made his blood run cold. A $500,000 fine for unauthorized water management structures and encroachment on community land. The HOA claimed his dam, built decades before their mansions, was illegal and threatened the safety of the 35 homes downstream. They demanded he dismantle it or face a forced sale of his land. Henry's hands shook with rage. He'd been a civil engineer for 40 years, designing bridges and water systems. He knew his dam was legal. His father had filed permits in 1975, approved by the county. The HOA's claim was nonsense, but there was more. The letter referenced a 2005 survey that redrew his property lines, shrinking his 20 acres to just 5. The 35 homes, with their pools, tennis courts, and manicured lawns, were built on what the HOA called community land. Henry smelled a scam. Those homes weren't on community land, they were on his land. He called his old colleague, Laura Bennett, a property lawyer with a knack for sniffing out fraud. Laura dug into the county records and found a bombshell. The 2005 survey was filed by a company that didn't exist, with signatures from surveyors who were never licensed. "Henry," she said, her voice sharp, "this is a land grab. They forged documents to steal 15 acres of your property." The evidence was clear. The HOA, led by its president, Margaret Voss, a real estate tycoon with a $10 million mansion, had orchestrated a scheme to expand their development by annexing Henry's land. Henry and Laura filed a lawsuit demanding the return of his 15 acres and damages for the illegal construction. Margaret's legal team hit back hard, countersuing for environmental damage and emotional distress to the community. They buried Henry in paperwork, racking up $80,000 in legal fees in 3 months. Every week brought new harassment, code violations for his orchard, complaints about his tractor's noise, even a health department visit claiming his dam was a mosquito breeding ground. The pressure was crushing, and Laura warned that the trial could take years. Henry's savings dwindled, and the thought of losing his father's legacy tore at his heart. Then Henry remembered something his father used to say: "Water finds its own path." The dam, a simple concrete structure with manual floodgates, controlled a creek that fed into the valley. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, Henry would show them what real power looked like. One stormy night, with Laura's reluctant approval, Henry drove his old pickup to the dam. He climbed the embankment, rain soaking his jacket, and turned the rusted wheel to open the floodgates. Water roared through, a torrent rushing down the valley. By morning, the pristine lawns of the 35 mansions were submerged, pools filled with mud, tennis courts underwater, driveways washed out. No homes were destroyed, but the message was clear. This was his land. The stunt went viral. News crews descended on Sunrise Valley, filming the flooded yards and interviewing furious homeowners. Margaret Voss called it vandalism, but Henry stood his ground. "They built on my land," he told reporters, holding up his 1975 permits. "I just let the water remind them." Social media exploded with hashtag #DamnJustice, and property rights groups rallied behind him. The public outcry forced the county to fast-track the trial. In court, Henry's evidence was undeniable. Laura presented the 1975 deed, permits, and aerial photos showing his original 20 acres. A hydrology expert testified that the dam was safe and legally built. The fake 2005 survey crumbled under scrutiny. Its coordinates didn't align with any known benchmarks. The HOA's team tried to argue adverse possession, claiming the homes had stood too long to dispute. But the judge wasn't buying it. Forged documents don't grant ownership, he ruled. The verdict came after 4 hours. Henry owned the full 20 acres, and the HOA owed $1.2 million in damages. The 35 homeowners were ordered to pay $200,000 annually in rent or relocate their structures, a logistical nightmare. Henry stood outside the courthouse, rain still falling, as reporters swarmed. "This is for my father, who built that dam, and my wife, Ellen, who loved this land," he said, his voice steady. Margaret Voss slipped away, her empire in tatters. That evening, Henry closed the floodgates, the creek settling back into its quiet flow. His land was his again, and so was his peace. Sunrise Valley learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate a man with a dam and the truth on his side. They thought they could bury their lives under 35 mansions, but Henry Clark was digging up the truth with tools they couldn't outrun. Armed with a 1975 deed and modern GPS, the 68-year-old farmer was about to expose a decade-old scam that stole his family's land. Every step he took brought new threats from the HOA, but what he uncovered would spark a fire that even their million-dollar lawyers couldn't put out. And when Henry stood by his dam, he knew one turn of a wheel could change everything. Henry Clark sat in his farmhouse kitchen, the 1975 deed spread out on the table like a battle map. The Sunrise Valley HOA had slapped him with a $500,000 fine, claiming his dam, built by his father to irrigate their 20-acre farm, was illegal. Worse, they'd redrawn his property lines with a fake 2005 survey, shrinking his land to 5 acres and building 35 mansions on the rest. Henry, a retired civil engineer with 40 years of experience, wasn't about to let Margaret Voss and her HOA cronies steal his father's legacy. He called Laura Bennett, his lawyer, who was already knee-deep in county records. "Henry," she said, her voice electric, "we've got them. This survey is a fraud, and we're going to prove it." Laura hired a professional surveyor, Tom Reynolds, who arrived with a truckload of gear, GPS base stations, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. "If they moved your boundaries, we'll find the original markers," Tom promised, setting up his equipment in Henry's fields. For 2 weeks, they mapped every inch of the 20 acres, cross-referencing the 1975 deed with satellite data. The results were jaw-dropping. The deed's boundaries extended far beyond Henry's current fence, encompassing the foundations of 35 homes: Margaret's $10 million mansion, the Wilsons' tennis court, the Carter's pool, the Thompsons' guest house, all built on land legally his. The HOA had stolen 15 acres, worth over $5 million. Margaret Voss didn't sit idly by. By day 4, she was at Henry's gate with a new violation notice, this time accusing him of environmental endangerment for his orchard's pesticide use. Her tailored suit and icy smile barely hid her panic. "Mr. Clark," she said, flanked by 2 board members with clipboards, "your actions are disrupting our community. Dismantle that dam or we'll escalate to state regulators." Henry held up his deed. "This says I own 20 acres, not 5. You're standing on my land right now." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she left, promising consequences. The harassment intensified. The HOA filed complaints about Henry's tractor noise, sent health inspectors to his farm, and issued a $10,000 fine for unpermitted water diversion. Neighbors who once waved politely now glared, pressured by Margaret to shun him. The Wilsons claimed his dam's overflow was a flood risk, though it stood strong for 50 years. Laura warned Henry the HOA was building a case to seize his land through eminent domain. "They're desperate," she said. "Your survey is a threat to their entire development."
Henry knew he needed more than evidence. He needed attention. He reached out to Sarah Nguyen, a local investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. Sarah met him at the dam, a sturdy concrete structure overlooking the valley. "This is bigger than a property dispute," she said, filming the creek and the mansions below. "This is theft." Her article, "HOA Steals Farmers' Land for Millionaires' Mansions," hit the local paper and went viral online. Social media exploded with #DamnJustice, and property rights groups offered support. Suddenly, Henry wasn't alone. Thousands were watching. Margaret doubled down, hiring a PR firm to spin the story. They called Henry a disgruntled farmer endangering the community, but the public wasn't buying it. Comments flooded Sarah's article. "HOAs are the real crooks. Protect Henry's land." The pressure forced the county to schedule a hearing, but Laura wasn't optimistic. "Their lawyers will drag this out for years," she said. "We need something bigger to force their hand." Henry stood by his dam at dusk, the creek glinting below. His father's words echoed, "Water finds its own path." The floodgates, rusted but functional, could release enough water to flood the mansion's lawns without destroying homes. It was a risky move, but the HOA had pushed him too far. "Laura," he said, his voice steady, "get ready for a storm." As he gripped the gate's wheel, Henry knew the next move would shake Sunrise Valley to its core. The water was ready to flow, and so was justice. They thought they could drown his fight with threats and lawsuits, but Henry Clark turned the tables with a single twist of a wheel. When the 68-year-old farmer opened his dam's floodgates, the water didn't just flood their lawns, it washed away the HOA's lies, exposing their scam to the world. Sunrise Valley was in chaos, and Henry's battle was just beginning. But as the millionaires scrambled to save their mansions, a new offer from Margaret Voss would test Henry's resolve like never before. Henry stood atop his dam, the rain-soaked night hiding his silhouette. The rusted floodgate wheel creaked under his hands, a relic from his father's time. For weeks, the Sunrise Valley HOA had pushed him to the edge. $500,000 fines, forged surveys, endless harassment. They'd built 35 homes on his 20-acre family land, claiming it as their own. Henry had warned them, but Margaret Voss and her board ignored him. Now, as thunder rumbled, he turned the wheel. Water roared through the gates, rushing down the valley toward the mansions below. By dawn, their pristine lawns were swamps, pools filled with mud, and tennis courts submerged. No homes were damaged, but the message was clear. This was his land. The next morning, Sunrise Valley was a spectacle. News vans lined the road, filming the flooded yards. Sarah Nguyen, the investigative journalist, was first on the scene, her camera capturing Margaret Voss's $10 million mansion with a driveway under a foot of water. Henry Clark isn't just fighting for his land, he's fighting for justice. Her story hit national news, trending with #DamnJustice. Social media erupted. People called Henry a hero, while HOA supporters branded him a vandal. Property rights groups sent lawyers to back him, and locals gathered outside his farm chanting support. Margaret Voss was livid. She stormed to Henry's property with 2 attorneys and a cease and desist order. "You've caused millions in damage," she shouted, her polished composure gone. "We'll sue you into oblivion." Henry, leaning on his shovel, just pointed to the 1975 deed pinned to his porch. "Sue all you want, Margaret. You built on my land, and water follows its path." Laura Bennett, Henry's lawyer, stepped in, warning that any lawsuit would expose the HOA's forged 2005 survey. Margaret's face paled, but she didn't back down, promising a countersuit for environmental terrorism. Laura and Henry prepared for court. The GPS survey, 1975 deed, and Tom Reynolds' 40-page report were airtight, proving the 35 homes encroached on Henry's 20 acres. Sarah's second article, "HOA's Fake Survey Stole Farmers' Land," went viral, bringing more pressure. Advocacy groups filed briefs, arguing that forged documents threatened property rights nationwide. The county scheduled a hearing in 3 weeks, but the HOA's legal team was relentless, burying him in motions and depositions. His legal fees hit $100,000, forcing him to sell his old tractor. Then came the curveball. Margaret's attorneys offered a settlement of $750,000 to drop the case and dismantle the dam. "Take it, Mr. Clark," they urged, "or you'll lose everything in court." Laura saw it for what it was, a desperate ploy to avoid exposure. Henry thought of his father, who built the dam, and his wife, Ellen, who loved the land's quiet beauty. "No deal," he said, his voice like iron. "We're going to court." As he looked at the dam, now closed but ready, Henry knew the real flood was coming, in the courtroom, where truth would carve its own path. They thought they could bury him in legal fees and silence him with threats, but Henry Clark was ready to fight in court with the truth as his weapon. The 68-year-old farmer had flooded their lawns to prove a point, and now the Sunrise Valley HOA was desperate to stop him. As the trial loomed, a shocking new witness would tie Margaret Voss's family to a 15-year-old scam. But when the HOA played their final card, Henry faced a move that could destroy his father's dam and his legacy forever. The county courthouse was a battlefield, packed with reporters and property rights activists waving #DamnJustice signs. Henry Clark sat at the plaintiff's table, his 1975 deed and Tom Reynolds' GPS survey report stacked like ammunition. Laura Bennett, his lawyer, had spent weeks preparing, her office a war room of maps and affidavits. The Sunrise Valley HOA, led by Margaret Voss, had countersued Henry for environmental damage and public endangerment after he opened his dam's floodgates, flooding the lawns of 35 mansions built on his stolen 15 acres. But Henry's evidence was rock solid, and Sarah Nguyen's viral articles had turned public opinion into a tidal wave. The pretrial hearings were a slugfest. Margaret's legal team, led by a polished attorney named Richard Hale, moved to suppress Tom's GPS report, claiming it was unreliable technology. Laura fired back with a hydrology professor who testified that the dam was safe and the survey accurate to within inches. The judge denied the motion, allowing Henry's evidence to stand. Margaret's team pivoted, questioning Henry's mental stability and calling his flooding reckless. Henry sat unflinched on the stand. "I've been an engineer for 40 years, he said, his voice steady. "I know my land and I know my rights." Then came a bombshell. Laura called Emily Carter, a former assistant to Margaret's late husband, a real estate developer. Emily presented a 2005 email chain showing Margaret's husband paying a surveyor to falsify the survey that shrank Henry's land. "They needed more space for the mansions," Emily said, her voice shaking. "They knew it was Henry's land." The courtroom erupted in gasps, and Margaret's face drained of color. Reporters scribbled frantically, and Sarah Nguyen's live updates sent #DamnJustice soaring. The revelation linked the HOA's scam to Margaret's own family, fueling public outrage. Outside, supporters rallied, chanting, "Save Henry's dam!" Property rights groups filed briefs arguing that forged surveys threatened homeowners everywhere. But Margaret's team wasn't finished. They filed a motion for an emergency injunction to dismantle Henry's dam, claiming it was a public safety hazard. Richard Hale argued another flood could devastate the community, though no homes were structurally damaged. Laura called it a desperate attempt to destroy Henry's leverage. "They want the dam gone before the trial," she warned Henry. "It's their last shot to weaken you." Henry's legal fees had hit $120,000, draining his savings. Standing by his dam, the creek flowing quietly again, he thought of his father's words, "Water finds its own path." The trial was days away, and Margaret's injunction hung like a storm cloud. If the judge ruled against him, the dam, his father's legacy, could be torn down before justice was served. Henry looked at Laura, his jaw set. "We fight," he said. The courtroom was waiting, and the truth was ready to flow. They thought they could crush him with lawsuits and destroy his dam, but Henry Clark's truth was unstoppable, like the water he'd unleashed. In a packed New England courtroom, the 68-year-old farmer faced the Sunrise Valley HOA for the final time, armed with a 1975 deed and a legacy worth fighting for. What unfolded would not only reclaim his stolen land, but expose a scam that shook a community of millionaires. For Henry, this was more than a victory. It was a promise kept to his father and Ellen.
The courthouse was a circus, with reporters, activists, and locals spilling into the halls. #DamnJustice signs everywhere. Henry sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands steady on his deed, as Laura Bennett laid out their case. The Sunrise Valley HOA, led by Margaret Voss, had built 35 mansions on 15 acres of Henry's land, using a forged 2005 survey. Their countersuit for environmental damage after Henry flooded their lawns was crumbling under the weight of evidence: GPS surveys, the 1975 deed, and Emily Carter's testimony linking Margaret's late husband to the scam. The judge had already denied the HOA's injunction to destroy Henry's dam, but the trial would decide everything. Laura called Tom Reynolds, the surveyor, who projected GPS data showing Henry's 20 acres slicing through the mansion's foundations. A hydrology expert confirmed the dam's safety, debunking the HOA's public hazard claims. Then Emily took the stand again, producing bank records showing payments to the fake surveyor. "Margaret knew," Emily said, her voice firm. The jury leaned forward, and Margaret's polished facade cracked. Her attorney, Richard Hale, tried to salvage the case, arguing adverse possession and claiming the homes had stood too long to dispute. Laura shredded their argument. "Forged documents don't grant ownership. Theft is theft." Sarah Nguyen's viral reports had turned the trial into a national spectacle. Outside, supporters chanted, "Save Henry's dam," as social media amplified their voices. The jury, a mix of farmers and city residents, saw through the HOA's lies. In closing, Laura spoke to their hearts. Henry Clark isn't just fighting for his land, he's fighting for every homeowner cheated by greed. His dam stands for truth. Henry thought of his father, who built the dam, and Ellen, who loved the valley's sunsets. This was their fight, too. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Henry Clark. The 1975 deed is valid, and the defendant's structures encroach on his property." The courtroom roared. Reporters shouted, activists cheered. Margaret froze. The judge ordered the HOA to pay $1.5 million in damages and legal fees, and the 35 homeowners to pay $250,000 annually in rent or relocate their structures. The dam injunction was permanently dismissed. Henry walked out to a sea of cameras. "This is for my father, who built that dam, and Ellen, who loved this land," he said, his voice breaking. Margaret slipped away, her empire in ruins. That evening, Henry stood by his dam, the creek flowing gently under the stars. His 20 acres were his again, and so was his peace. Sunrise Valley learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate a man with a dam and the truth.